Here's everything you missed in episode 1 of Marvel's Secret Invasion. And the opening scene gives us one of Gravik's workers prepping for his mission as Everett Ross to go in undercover and get some information that could lead to the downfall of this planned attack, which is the whole focus of this episode. He gets the okay, ditches his burner phone, and loads his gun. And while all this is happening, we're getting an ominous monologue from the person he's going to see. And this guy is literally the definition of that meme. And I honestly kind of feel bad for this guy because he's right, but he's crazy, you know what I mean? But he sure doesn't know a lot about the... Now, all over this guy's wall is different attacks. He's got the red lines going on. It only takes him a few minutes to realize this isn't actually Everett Ross. It's one of Gravik's field agents. And then he promptly tries to choke out Everett Ross. And then Everett Ross's Skrull does wind up getting the shot off and kills our man here. And the reason we're even talking about this scene is because the blood is going to be a big deal for the rest of this show, I imagine. Anytime you see red blood like this, that means it's a real person and they're dead. Especially liquid blood. Not just a facial injury, as we'll see in just a minute, but real blood. Now, what's interesting to me, and we'll explain this a little bit later when we get to that scene, but him calling for backup here and it going to Maria Hill is actually a really big deal for this show. Because that means that's actually Everett Ross's watch. He's not just scrimmed, it means he's been kidnapped, I think. And during this foot chase, we actually get another hint of the fact this isn't Everett Ross because he gets hit by 2 cars and then just walks it off and keeps running. I think the little shot of him falling down the staircase is also supposed to sell that, but to be honest, it just kind of looked like Martin Freeman lost his footing. And then after missing a pretty hardcore parkour jump, and this shot of Everett Ross is a big deal because it shows us just how much damage a Skrull can take while staying in form. And this is why I said that red blood that's moving is going to be a big deal going forward in this show, because they can fake facial damage like this, but they can't fake pools of blood. And it's at this point that we get the reveal that this is not Everett Ross, that this is in fact a Skrull, and Talos says he's one of them. And this is our first chance to see just how bad it's gotten. And then finally, we get our main man, Nick Fury, coming down from Saber. And speaking of Saber, something else I want to call out that does not bode well for Everett Ross is the fact that that Skrull knew Fury was on Saber. Now, I don't know how common of knowledge this is, but he's supposed to be dead at this point. It's not just common knowledge that Fury's up there. Only a couple high-level government officials know, and somehow, this random Skrull impersonator knows. And again, we'll get a scene later showing exactly how. But for now, Fury's coming down from Saber, and he actually gets picked up by Maria Hill. And one thing I wanted to point out here is Fury walks with a limp, but I wonder, is that because he spent so much time in space, or is that just because he's old? And after picking him up in pretty much the middle of nowhere, Maria Hill drives Nick to see Talos, and this is where Talos can really info dump on Nick, and we can get a lot of the exposition that sets up the show. First things first, his wife and daughter are not with him, his wife being dead, and his daughter having rebelled. I'm sure this won't be a problem later, and it's in this scene that we get a shot of a native Skrull plant growing in Earth soil. Well, it's technically potted, but you get what I mean. And again, like pretty much everything else in this episode, this is setting up something that's going to pay off a little bit later. And after playing catch up with Talos, Maria Hill sits Nick Fury down and gives him the 1-2 on pretty much everything that's been going on since he's left, or at least everything Skrull related. And we find out a lot about the Skrulls here. Everything from them living in nuclear silos, to them raiding a weapons cache in Kazakhstan, and then we get this bomb from Talos.
If he succeeds, your species will cease to exist.
So it's safe to say the stakes in this show are pretty significant. Now, the entire show we've seen so far has been in Moscow, but we get this cutscene back to DC, where Rhodey is dishing that hot gossip on Nick coming down from Saber. Now, I don't know about you guys, but getting beamed into the middle of nowhere kind of looks like somebody else had to pull the lever. I don't really think Nick could just walk up to a pod, put in a passcode, and it would teleport him to Earth. I feel like there has to be somebody who's on Saber who sent him down. Even if they did it on Nick's orders, there's no way that's a one-man job. So I think there is some sort of disconnect here between the Saber ship and Rhodey. I don't know quite what it is, but I definitely don't think on Saber, Nick is considered AWOL, which is exactly how Rhodey describes him here. And I think this DC scene is setting up pretty much the rest of the show. I think there's going to be a lot of scenes in DC. Now, when we cut back to Moscow, Nick is saying he's going to go for a walk, and it was immediately obvious to me, but somehow Talos and Hill don't get it. He's literally trying to get taken here. That's why he's walking around all slow, looking at people for extra long, because he knows something's up. Now, while Fury's on his big walk, he actually sees 2 of Gravik's field agents. The first being this girl who's making out with her husband who just stops and eagle eyes him. And the second is obviously this little girl who stops and stares at him. What's interesting though is clearly that mom must also be a Skrull. So this is effectively just the Skrull version of Get Help. And it doesn't take long before Fury actually does meet up with Sonya Falsworth. And by meet up, I mean gets kidnapped by. And people in this show are saying Fury's lost it, but I think this Fury might just be the most on top of things we've seen him in a while. Because he walks in here and he acts surprised that Sonya isn't giving him information, but he bugs her immediately. Straight up Tony Stark style. Walks in, slaps the bug down, and then has the conversation. And for us, the viewer, Sonya is kind of like the most informed person we have so far. She's obviously not slick enough to know that she was just bugged, but she is slick enough to know that Fury is up in Saber, which again, as I mentioned earlier, is supposed to be classified government information. And considering the fact she also knows about the weapons cache in Kazakhstan and exactly what Gravik is planning to do, it's safe to say that she's got a man on the inside, or something like that. I don't know. I'm getting weird vibes from her. I don't want to say she's one of the bad guys, but it's just a weird vibe. I don't know. And then finally, we get to see what I'll call the worst named city in all of Marvel, New Skrullos. Should have just called it like Skrulltopia or something. That's a terrible name. But basically, this is one of those nuclear silos that Talos and Maria Hill were telling us about earlier in the show. Because the Skrulls resist radiation, they can live in these places that humans can't. And because the Russians kept a lot of secrets during the Cold War, there's a ton of places that are off the books that are covered in nuclear waste. Or at least that's the idea. Now keep that in mind. These are in nuclear waste facilities or nuclear silos that are decommissioned. Places that are radioactive. And they're growing food there. Okay, let me say that again. They're growing food there. Okay, they're growing nuclear pears, but they're growing nuclear fruit. I'm sure this won't have implications later. All these soldiers eating nuclear fruit, bro. Come on, there's, dude, I can't be the only one who picked up on that. Anyway, after Gaia picks up this new Skrull recruit, and this whole drive here paints Gaia as kind-hearted. And if you don't remember who Gaia is, you will be forgiven. It's Talos' daughter. So this is the girl who rebelled. And so by extension, she's going to be the nicest person on this team, I think. She's like the nicest one of the bad guys. She picks this new recruit up, she gives him some food, she says if you're loyal we'll reward you, na. And at first this just looks like a refugee camp. It gave me Walking Dead community vibes where it's like we're all banded together against the zombies. And you can see here that the Skrulls have a lot of humanity to them. It's not just the Skrull soldiers, there's a lot of good Skrull civilians that are just caught in between here. And after Gaia finishes her real estate tour, we get the real meat and potatoes of this show when she walks behind this back door. So we get a lot of shots here of what Talos later calls fracking pods. And to me, these look almost identical to the tech that Talos used on Captain Marvel in her movie, only she was suspended upside down, so it looks like they figured out how to not suspend people upside down. I don't want to give the Skrulls any points for that, but it does feel like they made an effort. Anyway, the reason this is such a big deal is not just because the Skrulls are kidnapping people and using them like this, like keeping them in these suspended comatose states. It's because it gives them access to all the info in the host's brain, which I'm gonna go out on a limb and say is how the Everett Ross Skrull, 1, knew to be able to contact Maria Hill, and 2, knew that Fury was on Saber, because Everett Ross is supposed to be CIA. And later in the show, when Talos actually asks about this room, Gaia says they're not all kept in there, meaning that Gravik might have a second location that he keeps hidden from even his top officers, and I'm gonna bet that that is where Everett Ross really is. But that also means that everything we've ever heard Everett Ross know about, now the Skrulls know about. Everything from vibranium to the inner workings of Wakanda, all kinds of stuff. And I know this show is primarily taking place in Moscow and then in the US, but if you're trying to start a global war and they're already doing things like using the Philippines, the idea that they hop over to Africa is not that crazy. Now, I'm not making that as an official prediction, but I'm just saying if they know everything that's in Everett Ross's head, this might get pretty serious pretty quickly, which is probably why Talos said,
If he succeeds, your species will cease to exist.
Now, next we're gonna jump to this diner scene. I'm gonna guess that this is like the cafeteria inside New Skrullos. And something funny I wanted to point out was Gaia's actually reading a book here that says Understanding the Human Mind. It's not sus at all. And then we get this scene from Gravik's secondhand man, and it's during this scene that Gravik finds out Nick Fury is planetside, which at the time I was a little confused about, but on the rewatch, it's definitely from the girl in the blue hat and the girl with the ball. And something else I wanted to point out is that neither the girl with the hat or the girl with the ball are in that lineup of people in fracking pod odds, meaning they're probably also with Everett Ross in whatever the second location is. But then we get this exchange from Gravik and his second-hand man where he says, is that to protect me or the cause? And his second in command says, you are the cause, which is super culty to the point that even Gravik shoots it down. Now it's at this point that we start to get into the weeds with this and find out just how multifaceted some of the characters in this show that we've seen so far actually might be. So Gaia is given money on behalf of New Skrullos to go and procure these bombs. But the interesting thing about her having to procure these bombs is that earlier Maria Hill explains to Fury that they kind of already have them, because Fury asks specifically, does Gravik have the means to carry out this attack? Which is how we learned about the raid on the weapons cache in Kazakhstan in the first place. So why would he need to pay money for something he's already stolen, unless it wasn't them who stole them? And so who else do we know that we've met so far that seemed to know of the weapons cache in Kazakhstan and also was a little withholding about information about it? That's right, Sonya Fallsworth, who I said earlier I thought I was getting a weird vibe from. So again, Sonya, I'm not calling you out specifically, but I'm just saying if this is your arms dealer and he's a Skrull and he's not openly giving the stuff over to another Skrull, I mean, there is some fishy stuff going on here. Now, while Fury and Talos are in there dealing with the arms dealer, Maria Hill spots Gaia leaving with the red backpack and decides to pursue on foot, which ends in her getting the crap beat out of her by Gaia, and then Talos running after her. And again, I'm sure this wouldn't cause any problems. And it's here that Gaia's motivation shifts because she learns that her mother is dead, and as Talos claims, it's actually Gravik who ordered her murder. If Gravik did have Gaia's mom killed, there's got to be some sort of reason for it, and my guess is that he thought it would keep Gaia on his side. Because I bet you Gravik is hoping that she will blame Talos, which to be fair, she does have a knee-jerk reaction to that. And then for some reason, he lets her leave with the bombs. I don't think he would do that. He literally told Fury not 5 minutes ago,
If he succeeds, your species will cease to exist.
and then he just lets her walk out with them. I don't know, that rubbed me the wrong way for some reason. I get that he obviously wasn't gonna pull the trigger, but I just can't believe he let her walk away with those bombs. Anyway, moving on, we cut to the scene that we got the most footage of in the trailers, which is Nick Fury at this bar in Moscow talking to Maria Hill. And again, in this scene, we get another shot of one of Gravik's agents. And at this point, he's not even trying to hide that he knows who Nick is. It really gives me that bar scene from Spider-Man Homecoming, where Mysterio has been like there the whole time. Anyway, for some reason, Nick doesn't quite catch on that this guy knows exactly who he is, and he just goes and sits down and talks to Maria Hill. And we get a lot of character development from Maria Hill here, and also one of the saddest lines in this episode, which is check your footing, because if you don't, somebody might get hurt. And after drinking and I'll presume losing a chess game, laying on his bed having flashbacks to the snap. And then we jump to this scene of Gaia handing off the bombs to Gravik's main man. And something I wanted to call out here is the rest of this place looks fairly well kept. I mean, in the best way that an abandoned nuclear silo can look well kept, except for this boardroom. All these lights are hanging, and I don't know, the lights are on, but it just looks so disheveled in here. You would think they would gloss up the command center a little bit. And even though the refugee area is much more fleshed out and doesn't feel as temporary, for Gravik, this is temporary. For Gravik, this is not home. And it's also during this scene that we get Gaia's first real change of heart when she says maybe we should postpone the attack. And once she's told that the attack is going to be moved up, she immediately makes contact with Talos. Now they skip over how she makes contact with Talos, which I think is kind of a big deal, but they just totally breeze right past it. I feel like it should have been set up more, considering she immediately says that she's taking a risk by being there, which makes me think she might have been followed or tailed or something. And that's why her helping in the last attack doesn't help. But anyway, Gaia and her father Talos have a little bit of a heart-to-heart. She gives over all the info about the attack, or all the info that she has about the attack, and says that she's even gonna mark the bags for them in infrared. And that leads us right up to the biggest scene of the show, the attack on the Red Square in Moscow. Now when Gaia walks in with the backpacks that are painted in infrared and immediately passes them off, and the bags she hands off clearly have weight to them, so there's something in both of these bags. The two guys split, and then we go back to Nick, and it's at this point that Nick's world starts to break a little bit, because when he looks to his right, he sees one of the little girls that he saw in the beginning of the episode, and then as he follows that little girl, pretty accurately assuming that it's a Skrull, he watches the little girl with the ball turn into the woman with the hat, turn into the man from the bar that he bought a drink, and then finally, of course, Gravik. And then everything in this episode comes to a head at once. The bags that Gaia spray painted were decoys. Nick realizes Gravik has been there all along, and then Gravik hits the detonator for the bombs. And then, unfortunately, the most gut-wrenching part of the whole episode, Gravik has now seen Nick Fury, so he immediately scrims Nick Fury and then shoots Maria Hill in the stomach, echoing Maria Hill's line earlier in the episode,
Check your footing. Otherwise, someone's gonna get hurt.
and thus giving Nick Fury a real dog in this fight. Obviously, it was super important before, but it's personal now. And unfortunately, this is Maria Hill actually dead, because not only do we see the pool of blood, meaning she's not a Skrull, the first name in the credits is special guest star Maria Hill, meaning she's not going to be in any more episodes, or at least not many, which means to me that she's probably actually dead. I know it's superhero movies, people come back all the time, but this one just, I don't know, man. That the pool of blood looks a little rough. Anyway, thank you for watching Got Culture, and make sure you subscribe down below so you don't miss a thing, Secret Invasion, and I will see you guys very soon with a brand new Marvel video.